What's up, guys? I got another Deadrop video for you today. While we wait on Snapshot 6 news, which hopefully we'll be seeing within the next week or two, I thought I would put together a video that talked about the movement skill gaps that we could potentially see down the road in Deadrop. And before I start, just in case you're not familiar with Deadrop, this game is in a pre-alpha state. We are nowhere near a finalized game. So with that being said, everything that I state here is just purely speculatory, right? Ultimately, we have no clue what the movement is going to look like in Deadrop once it releases, but we can look into other game skill gaps, we can look at how they play, look at how Deadrop currently plays, and perhaps dig into a couple comments from Mr. Bowling himself and have a little fun speculating. Great movement in video games is something that is extremely relative to the player. But the one thing that I think most FPS gamers can agree on is that the movement skill gaps in video games are necessary not only for the competitive side of things, but also the replayability side of things. And you ask, where's my proof? Judge, I'd like to bring Modern Warfare 2 to the stand. When Modern Warfare 2 launched, the Call of Duty community went from hype to anger in about a week's time. And honestly, it kind of seems to be the norm for that community these days. But I honestly don't blame them on this. Infinity Ward basically removed any kind of movement skill gap from the game, and I think all of gaming Twitter were at the ready with their pitchforks. Then, months later, Infinity Ward had to walk backwards and add in plating while sprinting, as well as tweak the time for sliding and shooting, and honestly, when they did that, it was pretty underwhelming.
This feels the exact same. This feels literally the exact same.
All the reason for developers to bring in gamers during the development process, but hey, I'm just a spoiled little Midnight Society founder. I would say that this caused a lot of players to drop the game or at least not play it as much. So movement is a big deal, especially in franchises after a long time when they decide to change something and pivot away from a certain direction and go in a different direction. That's going to cause a lot of chaos within a community. When we talk about movement in FPS gaming, there's always been this variety of different styles of movement, right? And every FPS gamer has their different preferences. Some people like slower movement with mechanics like stamina built into them. When I think of this type of movement, I think of games like Tarkov or The Cycle. Just to note, both of these games have fall damage with no means of saving yourself, like a parachute, for example. On the other side of the spectrum, you have games that take movement to the extreme. The games that instantly come to mind are games like Titanfall or Hyperscape, RIP Hyperscape. When I think of Titanfall 2, I think of wall running and double jumping. This was some of the fastest movement that I can remember in any kind of popular FPS game. And then Hyperscape had all kinds of different movement mechanics, teleporting, jump pads, turning into balls. Look, man, I don't know. Well, both of these games had no fall damage. Why do I mention fall damage? Because Deadrop has fall damage. So I think we can rule out the wall running, the teleporting, and the turning into balls. We can probably rule that out. So then what? Are we stuck with slow movement and stamina built into the game? Not quite. The big majority of FPS games have what I would call the middle of the road movement. I would say that most modern FPS games stay in this area. The foundation is a medium pace sprinting, all while flirting with some unique mechanics thrown in. Most people refer to these unique mechanics as skill gaps. Apex, Call of Duty, Halo, Battlefield. The biggest names in FPS gaming in the last 20 years all have this middle of the road movement. But what about their skill gaps? Halo has always been a competitive game over the years, and Halo 5 actually had some pretty sweet skill gaps. The first of which was the thruster pack. This was in your stock loadout, anyone could use this. This allowed you to dodge enemy bullets. You could also create space from an incoming grenade, traverse the map. There were all kinds of ways to utilize this movement. One thing to note is that you weren't able to spam it. I can't remember what the recharge time was, maybe 5-10 seconds, whatever it was. Regardless, you were only using it once during a gunfight. The other movement skill gap that comes to mind is you could float in the air for a couple of seconds if you jumped and ADS'd. This allowed you to again throw off an enemy during a gunfight, or you could utilize this to shoot over obstacles, traverse the map, that sort of thing. Again, Halo 5 got a lot of hate for a lot of things, and it was deserved, but the movement was one thing that I was actually a fan of. While speaking of Halo, we can dive into one of Infinite's skill gaps, and that's called curb sliding. It's actually something that wasn't purposely designed, but more so something that the community found. Curb sliding happens when you sprint off the side of a small structure and hit a slide almost at the same time. This creates like a boosted slide that gets you across the map much faster than sprinting would. This movement is really difficult to pull off for a casual gamer. It takes near perfect timing, and if you miss it, you pay for it by just crouching there looking like an idiot. So there's some risk versus reward involved. A very cool movement technique that is so satisfying whenever you pull it off. Diving into the Call of Duty side of things, there were many skill gaps in years past. Drop shotting, slide canceling, and b-hopping come to mind. Drop shotting is a technique in where the player goes prone when in a gunfight. This technique really shines whenever you're really close to your opponent. The objective is to break the line of sight from the enemy, so the closer you are, the farther the enemy has to readjust their crosshairs. And when it comes to slide canceling, it's really no more as of Modern Warfare 2. It was in Call of Duty for many years, but this was a broken mechanic that made absolutely no sense to me, but it was a combination of sprinting and sliding. The reason for doing this was kind of twofold. The first reason was to reset your tac sprint, and the second reason was again to throw off the line of sight of the enemies. While the mechanic was absolutely broken, in the right hands, you could do a lot of damage with this. And then finally we come to b-hopping. B-hopping is a difficult mechanic that involves taking your momentum from sprinting, turning 90 degrees, and timing your jumps as you hit the ground. What this would do is send your character's body to the side very quickly, and you'd have a high advantage during a gunfight. Again, this mechanic is used to throw off the crosshairs of your enemy. Highly difficult to master, but highly satisfying when you pull it off. Now that we know a few movement skill gaps in other games, what can we expect from Deadrop? Well, to be honest, it's hard to say at the moment because the game is still in a pre-alpha state. Anything is subject to change at this point, but there are still a couple of things that I'm pretty sure that we can confirm. The first being ledge hanging. Ledge hanging is a great technique in the game to give chase, escape a gunfight, or save yourself from fall damage. While I'm sure that we'll see this mechanic tweaked over time, it's something extremely unique in current FPS shooters and a welcomed addition to the overall movement. In similar fashion of current skill gaps, this technique needs to be mastered and practiced. Not everyone can just jump off a ledge and calculate a perfect ledge hang. Remember, this is an extraction shooter. There's a lot on the line if you make that jump.
Listen, bro, what the hell did
And then there's equipment and gadgets. During a Snapshot 5 AMA that Midnight Society held a while back, a question was asked about wingsuits. And if you guys have paid any attention to my channel in the past, you know how big of a fan I am of gadgets, equipment, wingsuits, grapples, all of that fun stuff.
Helmet Fire says, could something like the wingsuit be in the game as a consumable, a one-time use, jump jetpacks, wingsuit? It could. Yeah, we're like, I think there's going to be a variety of type of gadgets, and some of them will be persistent. Some of them will be, persistent until you lose it, for example. Some of them will be persistent until you use it. Some of them could, there's a lot of different ways that we can use gadgets, and each of them will have their own design to it.
Rob didn't directly say that wingsuits are in the game, but he very much assured us that they are actively developing gadgetry and equipment. One thing to note is that Rob suggests that gadgets will be lootable and pretty much losable, meaning that you will have to find the equipment in the Deadrop world and either use it or extract with it. This means that we can expect gadgetry to not be a part of our standard loadout, like the thruster pack in Halo 5. You should think more like Halo Infinite. You may find a grapple or a wingsuit out in the world while you're playing. You have the choice to either utilize it in the same match, or you can extract with it and use it at a later date. And really right now there's no reason to speculate about broken mechanics such as slide canceling or curb sliding in Deadrop, because while there are certainly mechanics that need to be fixed in the game, that's just it. They're gonna be fixed. So we're in a pre-alpha state. We've got a long journey ahead of us, so I don't know if there's going to be any kind of those broken mechanics. I assume that there's not going to be. So what do I think the movement skill gap will be? I think it's going to be with gadgetry. I think you're going to have people zooming around with wingsuits and grapples. By the way that Rob is talking, it seems like a lot of that gadgetry is going to be necessary if you're going to a certain sector, going to do a certain quest. You may need a wingsuit, you may need a grapple, that sort of thing. I think a lot of that is not only going to fall into the quest, but I think it's going to fall into a lot of the gunfights. So it's going to be really fun to see what kind of movement gadgetry we end up getting in the game. And I want this to be open discussion. What's your thoughts on movement? How do you want the movement to be in Deadrop? Do you want it to be slow like Tarkov? I hope not. Please get out of my comments if you do. No, I'm kidding. Stay. Or do you want to be fast and zooming around like Titanfall or Hyperscape? Or are you like me and you like the speed of like Apex, Halo, Battlefield? You get those gadgets that you can kind of play with, but the movement is kind of middle of the road. So let me know your thoughts. And like I said, we're inching closer and closer to Snapshot 6, so there will be more videos to come. Hey, I hope you have a good week, and I will see you on the next one.